Down there, below the clouds, at the start of this amazing piece of road, is NASA's JPL, or Jet Propulsion Laboratory, one of the coolest places on the entire planet. And beyond that, in Los Angeles, is the North American Aviation Company. Now, one of the people that has connected these two places over the years is a man whose unusual job description was pad leader. His was the last face that the astronauts on the Mercury, Gemini and Apollo missions would see before blasting off into space. He was in charge of everything that happened on the launch pad. He was hugely respected for his engineering rigour and fastidious attention to detail, but also came to be loved by the astronauts and seen as something of a good luck charm in those final, fretful moments as the clock counted down. Why mention him? Well, the name of this German-born engineer who lived in America inspired the name of an American company that re-engineers German cars. His name? Gunther Wendt. The company whose name he inspired is, of course, Guntherwerks, based here in Huntington Beach, California. It is part of the ever-increasing pool of Restomod companies that use a Porsche 911 as their base. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, oh no, another drain on the ever-dwindling pool of 964s. But no, Guntherwerks takes the later 993 generation of 911 as its base, and then goes in a bit of a different direction. Anyway, I think before we go any further, we should introduce the main man behind the company.
Yeah, I'm Peter Nam, and I'm the CEO and founder of Guntherwerks. Yeah, I really started out as a BMW fan. So, I loved the BMW M cars. My first car was a BMW Z3 that was also on the James Bond film. And the last couple of years, I really sort of gravitated towards Porsche, just because I fell in love with the 911 and especially the GT3 and the GT3 RS, which really spoke to me. I think it's one of the last few modern cars that still have that driving engagement and that unfiltered performance that a lot of modern cars are lacking these days. I really started out doing cars as a hobby. It started out as a hobby and it became a full-time business, and started Vorsteiner first. I've been doing that for the last 17 years, and Guntherwerks has sort of been the last 4 years.
Vorsteiner, in case you're not familiar with the brand, primarily makes aftermarket carbon fibre components for cars. It means Guntherwerks is well placed when it comes to its own bespoke carbon body panels, seats, steering wheel, etc. Anyway, back to the bigger picture. I wanted to find out from Peter what the aim or particular philosophy of Guntherwerks is.
It's to take the air-cooled 911 and make the highest performance car possible using technology and using the analog air-cooled 911 base that has the driver engagement and the purity, and injecting technology into it without taking away from the emotional essence and the purity driving experience of the car. The process is kind of quite the opposite of what other people have done. What we've done as a basis is take the original chassis, which has two suspension mounting points. There's an inner and an outer, and the outer suspension mounting points were primarily used for all the Cup cars. So the first thing we did is we wanted to square up the track, because all 911s inherently have a wider track in the rear than the front. So we squared up the track and mocked up the suspension and the wheels, and used that as our basis, and then designed the body around the square track. Our philosophy is functional beauty. For us, functionality comes before beauty. Beauty is the end result of the functionality. But for us, functionality and performance is always the first thing we look at before we look into the aesthetics and the beauty of the car.
The end result is striking, a melding of classic and modern. There is a simple, pebble-like smoothness to it, but also a superhero stance with those humongous carbon arches, which house 335 section tyres at the rear and, even more extraordinarily, two 995s at the front. It almost looks as though there should be something other than a traditional 911 engine in the back, but a flat six remains in situ.
Yeah, the motor is designed by Jeff Gamroff, and I think arguably he's probably one of the best air-cooled engine builders in the world. He's a mad scientist, and When I went to visit him, we wanted a 4-liter. We wanted to make 400 horsepower reliably. And I said, can you do this? And he said, absolutely. So that's really where it started.
The Flat 6 has billet barrels, billet crank, Marlin pistons, forged conrods and Motec engine management, amongst other things. Then there are the other details on the car, like the optional 3D printed Inconel exhaust tips, the notch motif that's repeated from the headlights to the dials, the key, a wider version of the original, just like the car, the rear light bar, milled from a beautiful block of acrylic and then hand polished. These, as you might expect, are expensive cars, with prices for a conversion starting at around $525,000 or about £380,000. And even if your numbers did come up on the lottery, I'm afraid you'll have to settle for a second-hand one, as all the 25 build slots are taken. Thankfully, the factory has a hack. Its rather refined name is Greenwich, but behind the grand title is a car that has been thoroughly worked in the name of testing and development, which means I can rag it as hard as I like, which is nice. To be honest, when I first saw Guntherwerks about probably 2 or 3 years ago now, I really wasn't sure about them. The look just wasn't quite there, certainly not for the amount of money that they cost. But seeing this one, I think particularly this colour, this sort of lichen green, this sort of Farrow and Ball type of colour, there's a purity about this one now, there's a polish to the whole thing. Things like actually this new steering wheel in here, it feels like the final sort of 10-15% has actually come together and it's much more cohesive, it makes much more sense. It's a much more beautiful car. Yes, it's still a little bit caricaturish in some ways, obviously with those huge distended arches, although I do like the fact there is obviously a reason behind them. But design details like the sort of the front air intake sort of underneath those headlights, and when you notice that it looks like a Carrera GT, it just kind of, makes more sense. So what's it like to drive? Well, you get into it and in some ways it's exactly what you expect, because the steering's pretty heavy. It feels like it's got all the grip of those hugely sort of distended wide tracks. It feels pretty heavy sort of through corners. It seems like there's going to be an unburstable amount of grip in it. But on the flip side of that, it also still feels like a small car. It feels like a 993. It doesn't feel huge and as wide as an Aventador. There's an intimacy about it still, which is really nice. They've obviously worked hard on the touch points. This G50 gearbox, this 6-speed Getrag gearbox, the throw on it is definitely reminiscent of a 993, but it's just so much tighter. It's much more mechanical now. And of course we've got this lovely aluminium shifter here with air-cooled etched into it. It's still the long throw, so it's still got the character of a 993 shift, but it's just got more precision. There are obvious other 993 traits in here as well. The seating position for a start, so you sit with your feet canted over towards the middle, a fair amount of the steering wheel's just slightly off-centre as well to the right. The ride is definitely firm. It feels like it's been set up for the track and you can get there, but it's more track leaning than road biased, and it gets better the faster you drive it. In fact, everything really wakes up when you press the sport button down here. That's better. It's not quite Bruce Banner ruining yet another shirt, but the switch in mapping makes a palpable change, and the noisier nature of the flat 6 seems to fit better with a pugnacious chassis setup. This Restomod engine really gets into its stride above 4,000 RPM. It just noticeably changes in character. It's really smooth actually as well. It reminds me a bit of the engine in the Singer that I drove for its smoothness. In some ways I'd rather prefer a bit more sort of bite right at the top end. I think I've experienced some air-cooled engines that really seem to snarl as they home in on the red line, whereas this doesn't quite, as it homes in on its 7,800 RPM red line. The other thing you notice is that actually with sort of 435 brake horsepower, 335 pounds-foot of torque, you've definitely got more grip than power. That's where the sort of the balance lies with the chassis rather than the engine. So it's quite nice actually. You can certainly use all the power. And then what about all that grip? Initially, I found it pretty disconcerting actually. I like a 911 to be, well, a kind of 911, and this really didn't feel like it. It's just got so much tenacity. The harder you push it, the more it makes sense. But it's not a car that you kind of really play with, dance with, I suppose. You roll your sleeves up, you get stuck in. I can't think of many cars that would be faster than this piece of road. I really can't. There is still that 911 balance there, a bit like in modern 911s, where you really have to go looking for that rear engine balance. It is there, but with all this grip, it's yeah, you need to dig a long way to find it. You need a big shovel. I actually enjoyed it more as the fuel tank emptied and some weight was taken off the nose, as it did feel a little more 911 in its balance. Nonetheless, this is not a dynamically delicate or relaxed touring style 911, and the idea of it on a more bumpy, cambered British B road is interesting. The JRZ suspension is of course fully customisable, so you could set it up differently if you wanted. Maybe I'd go a little softer, but then if you're driving to a track, I don't know, and this has actually, to be fair to it, dealt with everything that this bumpy road has thrown at it. Certainly gives you a sense of connection. As soon as you turn into a corner in this, you can understand why this set a 130.9 around Laguna Seca. Seems to cling on and on and on, and you turn in and you think, no, that must be it, and then you turn some more and it grips again, it leans in. I don't know what you'd have to do to completely run out of grip in this. Just for a bit of reference, that lap time is in the wheelhouse of a McLaren P1. And like I said, that lap time is not because this car has really monstrous amounts of power and torque to slingshot its 1200 kilos down the straights. It's all to do with the fact that it can apparently pull up to 3G in the corners. So what to conclude about this car then? I mean, in some ways it doesn't matter what I think because they've sold all 25 of them anyway. But for what it's worth, I think it's a 911 I can see appealing to a younger audience, an audience that's perhaps not so invested in the luftgekühlt as such. In many ways this doesn't really drive like a 911, and the look is certainly not classic 911. It is very much its own thing, and while no, perhaps it's not for me, I've enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. And of course, as you may have noticed, this isn't the only car that Guntherwerks has conjured up in Huntington Beach. But that's for next time. Hello everyone, thank you very much indeed for watching that. As you probably gathered, there is another film on the way from Guntherwerks, so please do make sure you're subscribed to the Carfection channel and you've got all the notifications turned on as well. That way you definitely won't miss out on it. And it really helps us as well. Anyway, see you next time. Thank you very much again for watching.